really strong results, and I think you'll be glad to hear about what she's doing and interesting. And then Morgan Whalen is back from her first solo flight of the General Assembly, and did just a dynamite job, but lots to share with you in terms of what went up there. And she said it was a very light agenda, not a lot went on this session. So we'll let her give you more details there. And then Jared Chalk is going to talk about a project that would go on to NIT and also take a lot of trucks off of Hampton Boulevard if this thing comes through. And so we think it's a real positive project and a grant application that we go through to the Department of Rail and Public Transit that we want you all to support. And so I want you to know what that is. And then we've got a few items for a closed session, and we'll slip into closed and talk about those. So with that, I'll ask George Homewood to step up.
I thought you were giving me a minute.
I was going to do it right before close. You can have it right now.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. Oh, when you want to do it?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I just figured we'd do it right before the closed session.
We do that.
Yeah.
We do that.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, this is an application that is coming to you from the Planning Commission that has a 1 negative vote, and based on y'all's policy, you want to hear about it prior to.
R2.
This is R2, yes, sir. So this is a flag lot. Let me find that. Here we go. This is a flag lot that exists off of Bayview Boulevard. As many of you know, we have a historical discomfort with flag lots in Norfolk, and so as a result of that, we require a conditional use permit to either authorize a new flag lot or, in this case, authorize the use of a flag lot that exists but has been part of a parent parcel for some time. The issue that came was this lot, the rear of it, there is, according to the neighborhood, a substantial amount of flooding that has occurred in years past. And so there was a concern about whether or not the house to be constructed would be impervious to flooding. Since the Planning Commission meeting, the developers agreed to ensure that the house is at least 3 feet elevated, at least the first floor is at least 3 feet off of the highest adjacent grade, which should take care of any flooding concerns. And that was the concern that created the 1 negative vote at the Planning Commission. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So as George said, we'd just like to bring those to you when they're not a unanimous vote like that. Move forward. All right. I should have, Kristen, why don't you, before you come up, let me say one other thing. I meant to say that we had talked about and advertised in Dropbox that we'd have a recycling conversation this evening. We've moved that to the 5th, to next Tuesday. So just I heard somebody saying, maybe it was you, Amanda, that you were here for the recycling conversation. So I didn't want somebody to sit through here all night and then say, hey, when's that coming up? We're actually going to do that at your meeting next Tuesday. All right. Kristen?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, item R5 on your agenda this evening is an ordinance that would write off $897,000 of uncollectible public service charges for fiscal year 2015. And while $897,000 is a big number, it's actually less than 1% of the total amount that we billed that year, which was $155 million. The Department of Utilities has an excellent collection rate of over 99% for the water, wastewater, stormwater, and refuse charges that are on the monthly public service bill. Our comprehensive collection program includes dunning letters, withholding state taxes and lottery winnings through the state debt set-off program, placing liens on properties, obtaining personal judgments, and after everything else has been tried, using a third-party collection agency. But after 3 years of extensive collection efforts, the potential for collecting additional revenue really diminishes. And so we would like to be able to remove those uncollectible charges from our books. And that's the reason for the ordinance, and the 3-year period is the reason why we're bringing the FY15 uncollectible debt to you now.
So I think you may have said this, but I didn't hear. That's item R5 on your agenda tonight. So. All right, if there are no questions, I'm going to ask Kristen to stay. And as I mentioned, the Department of Utilities has put together an operations apprentice program that I wanted you all in the community to hear about. You all have heard me say this before. We try very hard to make sure that everything we do, if there's an opportunity to improve situations in St. Paul's, whatever your department, whether it's Parks and Rec, utilities, whatever it is, we want folks to kind of have a filter of how does it impact our efforts in transforming that community. And as Kristen and her folks went through developing this program, they used that same filter, and I think we had really a fantastic result.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor and Council, again, like other municipal water and wastewater utilities, Norfolk's Department of Utilities has had difficulty finding skilled workers to fill our equipment operator positions for water distribution and wastewater maintenance crews and industrial equipment mechanics to maintain our water treatment plants. To address this challenge, we decided to create a utilities operations apprentice program. And with support from Dr. Susan Perry and Marva Smith and Winter Benda, the Department of Human Resources created 15 apprentice positions that were special projects positions. And we received 150 applications for those positions. Utilities Management Services Director Harry Kenyon headed up creation of the program and worked with our water production manager, Chris Harbin, and our utilities operations manager, Harvey Howard, and their staffs to develop the curriculum. The full-time 6-month rigorous training program included classroom instruction, hands-on demonstrations and practice on equipment and machinery, and on-the-job work with maintenance crews or mechanics. The instructors were utilities employees, with the exception of Willie Mall from the Department of Public Works, who provided the commercial driver's license training for us. The supervisors who did the training and their staffs were enthusiastic in spite of the additional workload because they knew they'd be getting well-trained, experienced, and dependable employees in the future. The program had 2 tracks. Those who trained to be water and wastewater equipment operators received certifications in flagging and backhoe safety, operation, and maintenance. They took a defensive driving class and spent many hours learning how to operate and inspect dump trucks and trailers. All of the apprentices who completed this track received Class A commercial driver's licenses. Those who chose the track to be industrial mechanics for the water treatment plants learned about locating and repairing underground piping and machinery plumbing, as well as how to disassemble, inspect, and rebuild several types of machinery, including vertical turbine pumps, flocculator transmitters, hydropneumatic valve actuators, and split casing centrifugal pumps. I'm pleased to report that on February 15th, 11 apprentices graduated from this rigorous program, 4 of whom are from the St. Paul's area. They are all in the process of interviewing for permanent full-time positions, and some of them have already received offers of positions and start dates. We anticipate ultimately being able to hire all of them. And we've already received inquiries regarding when we'll hold the next offering of the program. And 6 of our new apprentice graduates are here with us tonight, along with the creators of the program and several of the instructors. And with your indulgence, I would like to ask them to stand and be recognized. You all stand?
Any questions?
Kristen, when Councilwoman Doyle and I toured Morris Bridges, one of the things we were talking about was the fact that you had trouble finding folks and that you were sort of recirculating from other water treatment plants, other cities, et cetera. So what an innovative way to address the situation using our people. So, I mean, I think this is, I'd love to see this replicated elsewhere in the city. I'm sure we all would.
I just made a note of it, me too.
Yep. Good job.
Again, there was a need, and they figured out a solution of how to fill the need, and then to make sure that it's, residents from our community. I think it's a great story, so I just wanted to share that with you all and congratulations to everybody. And to those of you that are new to Team Norfolk, welcome. All right. Team Norfolk. What you'll find out now is everybody expects you to know when the garbage gets picked up, who's playing at Waterside, and everything else. And we'll keep you apprised. As I said, Morgan Whalen is here tonight to give us an update on this past General Assembly session. And I once again want to say Morgan's flying solo for the first time. You remember last session she worked with Thelma Drake. She couldn't have had a better person to guide her, who had obviously spent time up there. But this year she's done a dynamite job. I know several of you all were up for BML and other events and spent time with her, but wanted her to have a chance to tell you what happened.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, Mr. Manager, as referenced by Mr. Smith, here this evening to kind of discuss a recap of the General Assembly session. And as the manager said, this was the first session while I was flying solo, and because of that and many other activities that happened in Richmond, it'll definitely be a General Assembly session that I didn't forget. And did want to say just in general, like many things that we do in the city, the legislative session is truly a team effort. And want to thank you all for your continued relationships with General Assembly members throughout the year, the mayor for your support. It really does make a difference when we're talking with legislators, the fact that you all come up for VML Day, that you're engaged when they're in town. We can see the impact in Virginia First Cities as well. I also want to just take a second to thank the manager, Winter, and Bernard. Your teams have all been very helpful with getting really quick responses to every question, where in a short session, timeliness is even more important, and was getting day of responses. So just want to say thank you for all of that. And while it was a short session, it definitely felt very long. One of the biggest items that honestly didn't get a lot of coverage because of everything else that was happening in Richmond was the tax debate. And why I'm starting with this is this really set up the foundation for everything else in terms of the budget. And this is a result of the Trump tax cuts, the federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that had a direct impact on state policy. And because this was the first large change in about 30 years at the federal level, it changed, it had an impact on the state level. So typically, Virginia conforms. So by conforming, that would mean if you did a standard deduction on the federal, you'd have to do standard deduction at your state. Right off the bat, the state got about $500 million more. So this is unprecedented for a General Assembly session to have this much money at a mid-year budget update. And so why this was so contentious is the governor spent the money in his introduced budget. The General Assembly, which is controlled by the Republicans in both houses, they wanted to give the money back. So until you figured out how much money you had, you really couldn't figure out anything else. And so this really stalled everything else. But what it also did is it impacts all of ours 2018 tax returns. So typically this legislation is passed the first week, goes through, no one raises a concern, but it wasn't. But you needed emergency legislation for all of our 2018 tax returns. So while they were debating this, every week more and more tax returns were filed up, and at one point they had 600,000 tax returns that were sitting that they could not process until this decision. And then again, I think this would have been huge headlines if it wasn't for everything else. So they ended up coming to a compromise, but with that compromise, the priority of the governor to do the refundable earned income tax credit that helped Virginians that made less than $50,000 was not included in the project, in the end compromise. What ended up happening was the individual tax relief that we all will receive at the federal level is temporary. So the General Assembly is providing temporary tax relief for Virginians. So all of us, either in August or October, will receive a check back from the state. For individuals, it'll be $110, and for couples, it's $220. So that will happen and for the 2018 year. And then moving forward, they increased the standard deduction for individuals and couples. And they also took away, the federal government capped the state and local tax deductions. The state no longer did that. So it's temporary tax relief right now. And what they did is they created a fund also at the state level. So future General Assembly sessions can decide with any leftover resources how to spend that money. But what that did is that really impacted the budget. So right off the bat, you had about $500 million at least more to work with. And with the budget, there was a lot of items in the governor's budget that we were really happy with. There was $50 million for Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. There was more money for affordable housing. So by the General Assembly taking this action, and again, they took it late, it meant that there was less revenues to spend. So that meant they had to take it from somewhere else or kind of just cut things altogether. So for example, the House started their budget deliberations by removing every single thing that the governor put in the budget. The Senate didn't go quite that far. At the end of the day, though, in comparison to last year's General Assembly, we still have more resources in the state and Norfolk overall. Some things I just want to highlight briefly that were a positive that ended up from the General Assembly, and some things I know were interest, that there is some money for more money for affordable housing, not as much as in the governor's introduced budget. There's now $7.5 million in each year of the biennium statewide. So again, that's a small amount of money for the whole state. For Stormwater Local Assistance Fund, it's $10 million statewide. There is money for teacher raises. So there's an additional money. So there is 5% for next year of the biennium. There are some requirements on school divisions on when they have to meet those percentages. And again, it is the state share of state-funded positions. There is more money for at-risk. And some of these things only emerged from, because going back to the tax debate, for it to get passed, it had to be emergency legislation, so we could all file our taxes, state taxes. So you had to have a majority of both parties pass it. So with that deal, the Legislative Black Caucus asked for more money for at-risk, more money that really impacted urban cities, and with that, the city got, Norfolk Public Schools will receive more at-risk money.
Do we know how much that is yet?
The calc tools are not yet posted. So we'll be able to get the exact number because the state tax tool doesn't have the ADM, but it should be significant.
And then the federal government cut $10 million in the preschool initiative VPI, and they've put back $6 million of that 10, and that significantly hurt Norfolk Public Schools in our preschool program. So there's a $4 million gap. I don't know how that breaks down statewide, but there will be a need to make up the differences in that as well.
Absolutely. Some other items I know that of interest to council, community services boards were impacted in last year's budget with a great thing with the expansion of Medicaid, but they cut community services boards thinking that they'd get that reimbursement from Medicaid expansion. The General Assembly and staff at the state realized that there may be a lag time with that, so they are freed up some resources and made available if for some reason billings aren't coming in, so our local community services boards don't have to cut programs with that. Another good item, Delegate Matthew James has really championed this over the last year, and I know for years the city has really been advocated for payment in lieu of taxes from the port, and we've been told no over and over and over again. So instead, we worked with the Virginia Economic Development Partnership and the port, and we will have $1 million in FY20 of the budget just for port host localities to do specific economic development initiatives related to some legacy port buildings. So it's pretty broad. So that's thinking about $1 million just for 5 localities. It's a start. It's something that we'll work to advocate, and Norfolk really worked in partnership with Newport News, Portsmouth, and Richmond, but that we're specifically called out. So you can think about how much of the port we have, and $1 million in the state is significant for us.
Just for clarification, so $1 million for 5 localities divvied up.
So that we'll have to work with with the Department of Housing and Community Development. They have to. It's a new program, so we'll have to work with them to set it up. And it's not till the FY20 budget, so when it be coming back to that next year. But the program requirements and specifics have not yet been determined.
And specific to, you said, port buildings?
So the idea was that we host the port, and while we have many trucks and things go through the port, we often aren't a beneficiary of development directly associated with the port. So if we could improve maybe some of our industrial space, or maybe we have some old dilapidated buildings that were once port related, if we could improve or remove them, could we then get jobs and development in our city in those spaces?
That's specific to buildings, it's not available for any roads. I'm thinking that, all these
It's more building site readiness.
Okay. And then can I go back to the teacher raises?
Mhm.
So the 5% teacher raise, it's not that comes back to the locality too, right? We have to match that. Is that correct? How does that work? So it's when the General Assembly gives a raise, it's great. But then that means that we also have to find that money to match it at the same time. Is that correct?
So the school division has to commit to giving the raises. So there's a portion. So 2% is now in FY19. The budget that was passed last year had already received 3% in funds. The General Assembly added 2% more on top of that for FY20 for a total of 5%. There's certain requirements, and there's some flexibility if you could do some one year and one the other year, but you will have to certify a certain amount to the state that you are giving salary increases to those employees to receive the state match. Now, you can't, some of the arguments were you can use from General Assembly members, or, well, we're increasing at-risk funding for you. Could that help you with local match and increase lottery? So it's all, but it'll be a little bit of a game for localities and school divisions to make that match.
And candidly, we'd expect that to be covered through the funding formula, the increase that we've gotten, that's the indication we've gotten from the school system. And so if you remember the news we got from the assessor Saturday, told us, that frankly, the increase in assessments will add $600,000 to what we thought was going to be $2.4 million, which now in all likelihood will be $3 million of increase in what I proposed to you in March.
And not that anybody's going to turn down raises, money for teachers, but it's not as big as they're making it out to be.
No.
So the money was already put in the budget for the 3%.
Yep.
This was just an additional 2%. But everybody's saying, 5% for teachers. But most school districts had already given those 3% raises to their employees because it was in this year's budget.
Yep.
They could advance it, so.
Yes.
And wasn't that for SOQ funded only?
It was,
Therefore,
yeah.
if you're not an SOQ funded teacher, the school division still has to pay for your raise because you can't not get a raise because you're not SOQ versus the SOQs that do.
Right.
Yep.
So it's not really funded for
Yes.
all.
Yes.
The state is selectively funding.
That's why Norfolk, along with Virginia Municipal League and Virginia First Cities, we keep trying to argue for funding the true cost of education rather than just to some of the state shares.
Both Democrats and Republicans will be coming back and advertising that when they run for their re-elections in November.
Just real quick, another thing, good news story. Money was included in the budget for to create a Hampton Roads Biomedical Research Consortium. So this will be a partnership with ODU, EVMS, and Hampton UVA and Hampton Roads Community Foundation, and they're first going to explore issues that are relevant to the region, and they owe a report back to the General Assembly by next December. So it's about the idea of diversifying the economy with that partnership. And then just another item of interest, the General Assembly will start looking at a new revenue for gasoline tax. As we know, most cars are going to electric, so they're going to start that study because we are concerned in the future about transportation funding, with that being one of the main sources. And unfortunately, just a few things that didn't make it into the final budget that we were hoping would. All funding was removed for the census, which so there was $1.5 million to help localities with the census. Money was also removed for the offshore wind office. And the governor's introduced budget included this, but it didn't make the final cut. Was money $2 million for the botanical gardens and $400,000 for elections, and also all money for the presidential primary. So we're hoping some of those things will come back with the caboose budget next year, especially with the census and presidential primary. But those were some items you were hoping would make the final cut.
Real quick, Morgan,
yeah.
and maybe Kenny too, can the governor amend budget items? So can he put things back in?
It's a bill, yes.
Yes.
It's a bill.
Okay.
It's like any other bill.
So if there's something that he didn't like in that, which I know would be hard for him to mess with it too much, but can he add, say, 500,000 back in for botanical gardens if he wanted to, but have to
The
pull it
governor
from
didn't
somewhere
have to
else?
sign it. He didn't have to sign it.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, there's always the veto session is still coming up, so there's that option. But conference reports sometimes can be tough. So just to highlight a few, and I will say in your Dropbox under the General Assembly folder, there's links to some of the individual bills. I was referencing you just so you had them. For coastal resilience, these were local options, so they did expand the CPACE program, which I know Councilman Johnson and Ms. McClellan have been interested in the past. So that could be used for expanding. Right now it's just for energy efficiency, that it can now also be used for resilience and stormwater management. An item that we weren't happy to see related to coastal resilience was, again, the General Assembly banned the Commonwealth for participating in RGGI, or the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Last year, the governor vetoed that bill, and we expect him will do that as well. Related to strong and safe neighborhoods, Delegate Jones and Senator Cosgrove both had a bill expanding the Communities of Opportunities tax credit to the Hampton Roads region. This currently was in place in Richmond, and what it allows is if you're in the highest income census tract of the region, you will get a tax credit if you take a voucher. So it's the idea of deconcentrating poverty. So we were able to get that passed. It almost passed unanimously, which we were a little surprised. We thought we may get some pushback, so that we were looking forward to that bill being passed. And then another item that's again, it's a local option, is the General Assembly now gives local governments the authority, if they wish, to waive permit fees for affordable housing. And localities can decide what affordable housing is or isn't, but they gave us that authority to do that. In terms of education, just separate from the budget, we had a lot of conversation about school construction. Unfortunately, a lot of those items that Senator Stanley came down to town with did not pass this year, except for one item that would allow a school division to essentially work with solar panels and companies and work to produce more energy than consumed and lease it back. So that's one of the few bills that made it through related to school construction. And then transit and transportation, the big piece related to this, I know Councilman McClellan came up and spoke to this one, was there's a hold harmless provision. Transit is now on a funding formula or performance system, and it was going to provide a cut to Hampton Roads Transit. So the state is giving a 1-year kind of hold harmless provision while transit agencies get used to this new metrics. So the administration was supportive of that. So kind of switching topics, this is another item that I think there was probably over 50 lobbyists dealing with casino gaming this year. Everyone from MGM to Hard Rock to sports gaming, they all wanted to be part of this conversation. So just wanted to give a brief update of kind of where we started and where we ended. Since there's multiple pieces of legislation, and this really came from the historical horse racing that was allowed at Colonial Downs with the off-track betting. What ended up happening with the Pamunkey tribe, when they saw there was a compromise bill, that they asked that they would be part of the conversation for commercial casinos. And so a compromise bill was then put in with Senator Lucas the patron, and it would allow casino authorization in Portsmouth, Bristol, and Danville, and then a tribal casino in Norfolk and Richmond. And that bill passed the Senate. This was one of the final pieces of legislation that was acted on this year. It actually was holding up the budget for a period of time, and they didn't sign the budget until Sunday, when they were technically supposed to adjourn on Saturday, until they could reach a consensus. So what the final legislation allows is there will be a joint legislative audit and review commission, a JLARC study, and they're only going to be, they're looking at casino gaming in the 5 communities. They will owe that report back to the General Assembly by December 2019. The bill, it was important to General Assembly members that there aren't casinos in just kind of a strip mall, so there's a minimal capital investment of $200 million included in the bill. A referendum is mandatory, but it cannot incur until the JLARC report, but it has to occur before January 1st, 2021. No licenses can be issued until 2020. And then, so this will continue to be a policy discussion by next year's General Assembly. One piece that was really important for Norfolk when we were advocating was they took all state tax revenues or state taxes out of the final bill so JLARC could study it. But a piece that was important to Norfolk was, rather than us be a pass-through or get a portion of a bucket, was that instead council would have the authority to do a local option for a tax. So we wouldn't be subject to the will of the General Assembly saying, you know what, nope, next year transit's really important, and they take the local option piece, which the General Assembly has a history of taking money from local governments when times are tough or even when times are good. So that was important so we will continue to push that during the JLARC study. Again, real quick, just wanted to, the Equals Rights Amendment failed. It was throughout the debate to the final days of session trying to do some rule changes. It passed out of the Senate, but didn't go to the House. I know Councilman Smigley referenced the redistricting bill as of concern. The redistricting bill passed, but they removed the piece that would have impacted local elections. So the redistricting bill that passed, though, it has to pass again in identical form next year for then it to become a referendum. So this would be very new for Virginia to have redistricting this way with a panel. It'd be 8 General Assembly members and 8 members of the public. The moving of June primary election, I know Council passed a resolution for that. That also did not pass. There was concern related to vacations in the summertime. The SEC pipeline, this is Senator Sproul. We worked with Senator Sproul, and he had legislation related to Chesapeake and Norfolk. The committee chose to incorporate his bill into another bill that does a slightly different thing. So his bill is essentially that other person's bill, Senator McPike, and that bill did reports only if injury happened. So it's not quite as far as Norfolk would have liked, but it was a step for the SEC to release any report, so that was able to pass this year. Some legislation revolving evictions. council, it really just trying to simplifying the process. Right now, if you're an individual who's evicted, it's called a writ of possession, which they realize that most people don't even know what that means. So really trying just to simplify the language. Norfolk was included in some language in the budget where we will be part of a housing commission study, just looking at diversions and evictions and affordable housing in general, and if there's tools the state can do to help with those issues. Interstate 81, just wanted to bring this to your attention briefly because a lot of debate came up around this item around tolls on our tunnel. So the Interstate 81, those communities have said they don't want tolls. They also said they don't want to do regional taxes. And we know Hampton Roads, we have both. So this was a last-minute effort supported by the administration and some General Assembly members to try to get a fix from 81 that we know is greatly needed, but it only included a small fraction of money for Hampton Roads. And there was a lot of debate and frustration from legislators saying, where's the fix for tolls at the Midtown and Downtown Tunnel? You're fixing one problem, but furthering another. So the legislation ended up not passing, but it is something that we'll continue to hear a lot of conversation about equity and transportation and regions doing different things. And we're going to have a big problem with transportation funding in the future. Just there's not money identified for the Mid-America Bridge Tunnel or the high-rise bridge or things like, not the high-rise, just some of our older infrastructure. So that'll continue to be. And then just listing real quick, the House Courts Committee is known for the killer of the General Assembly, and even when bills pass the Senate on a bipartisan manner, the House Courts Committee just kills them all. There were some really good bills about suspended licenses. A lot of Virginians lose their license for non-driving related offense because they can't pay court fines and fees, and then they're just stuck in an awful cycle of not being able to get a job and illegally driving to work and not having insurance. And so that bill was killed by the House Courts Committee. Similar with decriminalization of marijuana, the reporting of lost and stolen guns, and it passed either house, and cash bail reforms. And then last, briefly with foster care, I know Mr. Hawks talked to you all about the foster care report. Some legislation did pass, and they said it was a starting point, not the end game, but they are looking at bringing the state's preventative services up to federal standards. They did a requirement where foster care is now going to have to reach out to, I think, family members and relatives before putting them in a home to see if you connect with family, and they did some legislation related to credit checks with teens. I guess some foster care teens were having really bad credit scores by people taking advantage of them being in the foster care system. And so those are some of the initial steps, but they're going to keep working throughout the summer to try to find a better solution for foster care in Virginia. And then beginning to wrap up, just want to say, again, we work closely with Virginia First Cities and Virginia Municipal League, and there was some bad bills again this year that always try to take authority away from council and local government. We were able to defeat a few unfunded mandates that would have required us to do how we do our financial statements a little differently and post them online, which would have required us to update software. We were able to maintain local authority. The scooter companies tried to take the ability away from us to regulate it. We were able to reach a compromise where instead we have a bill that says we can regulate it, and that was all. They also tried to take our ability to do parking fines and fees and cap that, but we were able to defeat that as well. And we worked as a coalition to really remove a harmful school funding language that would have taken $1.5 million from Norfolk Public Schools base next year. It would have changed how we evaluate land, and it specifically hurt Fairfax the most and then Norfolk second. So we would have really been hurt by that moving forward. So we were able to defeat that this year. So those were some good news stories, but unfortunate that we had to spend so much time on that. And then I know Mr. Andy Fox presented to you on this, but I just wanted to talk about the statewide implications of what this could mean for next year's General Assembly session in terms of redistricting. On February 14th, the U.S. District did finalize the map. And so this map will be in place for next year's elections. And all 140 seats are up, 40 in the Senate, 100 in the House. Right now, there's very slim majorities in both the House and Senate with 2 seats each. And with this is just kind of this is an illustrative graphic from Virginia Public Access Project. They ranked based on the 2012 elections with this new map the seats that were most at risk, and they're very senior Republicans. So some of the individuals who are most at risk from the new map are the Speaker, Chairman Chris Jones, Delegate Barry Knight, and Delegate Chris Stolley. Just how the map was redrawn is by you change one district, you impact another, and then you already have a few retirements that have already been announced ahead of the session, and we expect a few more retirements will happen in the reconvene session. Delegate Ingram and Delegate Helsel, both of them, they're big advocates for local government, actually, because they're both former mayors. And Delegate Toscano announced his retirement, which he was the former House Minority Leader before Delegate Feller-Corn. So those were kind of some big shocks, I think, throughout the General Assembly. So get ready for election season. We're all going to get lots of ads over the next few years before November. So just moving forward, the reconvene session is April 3rd. So the governor has until March 26th. That's his deadline on bills. We'll expect a few vetoes here and there and some amendments to items. We'll continue to share legislative focus areas. I know Mr. Pishko and I had a conversation, I think, right after I first took this role, is most effective lobbying happens outside of session, and that's true. It's continuing to share Norfolk's story throughout the year. There's opportunities to highlight our big priority projects in St. Paul's and flooding with the Housing Commission and the Joint Subcommittee on Coastal Flooding, and your team has been updating them throughout the years. George Homewood, Christine Morris, Kyle Spencer, they've repeatedly have gone to these groups to keep them updated on the great work happening in Norfolk. And then I encourage anyone, there's summer policy meetings with both Virginia First Cities. Virginia First Cities is doing a work group related to economic development and how do we help urban cities and change some state programs. And for council members specifically, the Virginia Municipal League does a one-day policy meeting, and it really is an opportunity to push Norfolk's priorities and have them be part of a state package. So it's a one-day meeting. I would accompany you, and we'd get you prepped, but would encourage any council members who are interested. It's a good way to force Norfolk priorities into it. So that's all I have, and happy to answer any questions.
All right, Andrea.
Just a couple of updates. HRBT, the funding, infrastructure funding, that was going to need to be emergency funding for passage. I guess I should ask the mayor about that. Did that all go through and we're moving forward, or what's the status of that? Remember for the additional,
The trestles.
the trussels?
Oh.
Yeah, so, it's taken care of.
It's taken care of. Okay, good. Good. Proffers, was that reversed, that proffer language from the past?
So there's a lot of debate on cash proffers this system. Since Norfolk has historically not done cash proffers, it wasn't necessarily a direct impact from that. And I may phone a friend of Mr. Homewood over here, but legislation did pass this year that was the compromise between the Home Builders Association, local governments, and they met for about over the summer till now. So a bill did pass that changes the system. I can share the specifics of the bill, but don't know them offhand.
Okay. And then the last one was early voting. Wasn't there something passed that allows early voting starting, no excuse, starting Saturday?
In 2020.
2020.
The first, that would be, it still allows the state to look into it. So it's the Saturday before, no excuse early voting.
Okay. And can we get, Councilman Smeagol, you had a great post that shared related to the redistricting maps, but I don't believe we've got it on our norfolk.gov/elections. We probably should get that information out there as soon as possible, and just a link to VPAP or whatever, but just explaining what people should expect. That would be great.
I'm being requested to speak at Civic League meetings to go through this, and I'm like, all I did was report, what was done, but people don't know.
Mm-hmm.
People did not know that their districts were changing.
And so many in Norfolk were.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, Mr. Riddick.
Yeah, on the cash bail, is that something that the locality, like our Commissioner, Commonwealth Attorney controls, or the state?
There's few things that the Commonwealth Attorney can control without state action, is my understanding of it. So this was to do statewide action to change the current cash bail reform system. There was a few pieces of legislation introduced, it just did not pass this year.
So does that mean, because I think he had already started the no cash?
So my understanding is Mr. Underwood did what he was able to do within his purview, but he can only do so much. This would have changed the overall statewide system and taken it even further.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Courtney.
So Ann Phillips was appointed by Governor Northam, and so her position was funded. Was there any additional funding put in the budget this year for flooding or sea level rise?
It is not.
I kind of wanted to ask the question so that everybody could hear the answer, but I think that's just important to know that while we have Ann Phillips, who's great, and she's from Norfolk and represents us well, we still need to advocate for her to get funding at the state level for her to be able to do her job effectively.
Yeah, to date, there is no infrastructure money available for flooding from the Commonwealth.
Or for an office.
Okay. Tom?
I just wanted to thank Morgan. I talked to her on the way out from VML, and I told her, I was very honest with her. I said, last year I was a little bit nervous for you taking on this role. And I'll tell you what, she has blossomed into a rock star. Everybody who that knows Morgan up there came up to me when she wasn't around and said, you've got a good one there in Norfolk. You need to keep her around. She's doing an outstanding job. She has found her way through the legislation and the legislators. There's a lot of new legislators there that don't know what they're doing. And so it was great to have somebody like Morgan there really helping to educate them on that. But she is well respected already by a lot of veteran legislative aides and also other cities and their legislative folks. So congratulations on a good first year by yourself.
Morgan, you did
I
a
hope
great
you'll take
job.
this the right way. He doesn't say those kind of things lightly. So that is high praise. Thank you, Mr.
We had a great time in Richmond for VML.
Well, I tell you, you all did. You
did a
all
great
really
job.
participate. You show when we need you to show. You're there on the things that you're interested in, and obviously, the incoming president of VML that certainly helps us and others being involved. So I appreciate what you all at the table do
Maybe are you
to
an
support us.
officer for Virginia First Cities?
I am co-chair for Virginia First Cities.
Fantastic.
We got some leadership.
Okay, who's up next?
Jared Chalk is going to come up and talk to you about a project for NASER that I think is going to have some positive impacts for us. But as I said, we're going to ask for your support for a grant application, which hopefully you will give gladly.
Thank you. So this is RF Terminals, also their subsidiary of
Good evening, Jared.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor
And to the council.
and council.
All right, thank you.
They're a subsidiary of Fornaser International. The company's main activity is the handling of and exporting of agricultural products. So this is vegetable proteins, commodities, feed grains, those sort of things. The company currently employs 48 people, and they were the recipient of the Shipper of the Year Award in 2017 from the Port of Virginia. So RF plans to invest $2.5 million into this new facility at NIT. You can see the area right there by Northgate where it would be located. This would be rail improvements, a rail spur, and an unloading and loading equipment. And so what they would do is bring the product in on the Norfolk and Portsmouth Beltline, which would take the trucks off the road, and they would put them right onto the ships from this facility. So it'd be a transloading facility. This would be about 10 to 15 additional employees that they would bring to the site. So they project about 5,000 TEUs per year would go through here. And a TEU, again, is that 20-foot equivalent unit, which is a shipping container. So that is about 10,000 trucks that would come off the road annually currently that use Hampton Boulevard and Terminal Boulevard. So what RF will be doing is they'll be submitting an application to the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation for the Industrial Access Railroad Tracks program. This program requires a local support, and so it requires that City Council approve a resolution for them to receive these funds. It provides $300,000 in unmatched assistance for the project. If the company puts in another $150,000, they can get another $150,000 from the program, so a total of $600,000. So again, we think it's a great project. It really continues to do what we want, is to push trucks onto rail and export product through rail instead of through trucks on Hampton Boulevard. So we'd ask for your support.
Mr. Thomas.
Just to clarify, you're not asking for money from the city of Norfolk, just
No
for
money.
just for
Support for the resolution for the application for them.
Okay, others? Okay,
So again, we think this is a no-brainer. We'll put this on your agenda for the 5th and keep moving. All right, Mr. Riddick, I think this is you want to make some comments.
I was thinking, what in the world would a 16-year-old be doing at MacArthur Center with a gun? And so in talking to a few people, and I talked to some of my fellow council members, and I'd like for us to start something called a Coach's Corner. On Saturday mornings, some of our local coaches, I talked to the lady basketball coach at Lake Taylor. Talked to Larry Stepney, who was former coach at Booker T and did well at Norfolk State. And they're willing to spend some time with these youngsters. I talked to our local track star, Ms. Doyle, and I thought about, and I also talked to Angela. She's certainly interested in it. But I thought about, say, on Saturdays, if depending on how our council person's schedules would permit, to spend a couple of hours or an hour or so with these youngsters. And let's just say, for instance, let's take Lake Taylor's female basketball team, and if they started running with Andrea, they could be, in tip-top shape, when the season comes around.
Not with me.
You mean
Because they won't.
I meant Courtney. That's our track star. And I talked to Martin, and he's willing to spend some time as well as bring some of his law partners in. I'm sure Tommy can find something, and Andrea. And I'd like to see us use the boxing arena. I'd like to see us use the Elizabeth River Trail, and just acquaint our youngsters with some things that they might not be acquainted with. And on Saturday for about an hour, and let's just see what we can do. We know Monday through Friday they're learning, reading, writing, arithmetic, but character deprivation is something that we're suffering from in our community. Character, and this would be an effort to build character in these youngsters, so that they can be the proud citizens of Norfolk we want them to be. And I was telling Martin at 16 years old, I was either trying to carry a girl's books home or either trying to find some kind of ball to play with. And so whether it's football, basketball, or baseball. And so we need to go to these youngsters and just find out what's going on with them. Because that was certainly shocking to find two 16-year-olds with guns at MacArthur Center. Certainly we can't afford, any negative press in any of our facilities. So I think if we take a proactive step towards helping our youngsters and see if it works, put a little pilot program together. We have recreation facilities all over the city, and let's just see what we can do to kind of, bring character back to these youngsters. That's what I was talking about. Doug and I mentioned to the manager, and so I hope that I can get the support around the table that we need.
All right, Andrea.
I think that is a great idea, Mr. Riddick. And while I will probably not be the runner out there, I'm happy to do other things. I mean, I think in general, what I heard, and I think we all hear, we have a community of people who want to help in the city of Norfolk. I always say we are the city that cares, but we haven't figured out a way to connect the dots and get those folks who want to help and volunteer to the kids who need that resource when they're not in school. So this gets back to this whole chief engagement officer, how do we connect those dots, work with our post, but I mean, there's a lot of people out there who want to help, so I don't know how we make it all available. Maybe start small, because we can't do, baby steps, but I think it's a great idea.
And there are some council people who are already out in the community during the weekday and on weekends helping with our young scholars to make a difference. And it does make a difference in their lives when you're out there.
Okay. So we'll shape up a framework for a pilot program for you and bring it back to you.
All
right. Mayor, that's what we have for you for the open session. We've got some closed session items. And,
before you go further, can you just look at PH3? It's a public hearing tonight, the downtown St. Paul's zoning district.
Thank you.
Can you just unpack
that? I'll ask George. George and I were chatting earlier. I'll give you my version, and then he can give you the detailed planning piece, which is really setting up the ability for property owners in the St. Paul's area to come forward to rezone their property in a way that is consistent with the plan that we're putting in place, the mixed-use, mixed-income community that the Torta Galleys folks helped us put together with the different design threats. I think the important piece for you to hear is nobody's getting rezoned tonight, right? And it can't, and I was saying, talking to Mr. Riddick before the meeting, this really, it keeps you all in charge of any land use decisions that go forward. So I can't go in and implement a land use plan or a master plan for St. Paul's without specific projects coming back to you all. So George, what have I missed?
Mr. Manager, you've missed absolutely nothing.
Oh, you're the best.
You know you better say that.
That's the key. It's setting the stage, but no actions can take place without coming to you all for a case-by-case specific review of a specific proposal.
All right, so George, why are we doing this?
Why are we doing this? To get it in place because we want to make St. Paul's ready to go when all the pieces and Mr. Riddick and Ms. Graves and their committee are ready to go and start the process.
So in 2014, the city and HUD, the city and NRHA submitted a St. Paul's transformation plan to HUD in 2014. So are we updating that plan with this?
No, sir. This. Oh, okay. No, sir, we're not. This is putting in place language that essentially extends the concepts of downtown, that is sort of a mid-rise, mixed-use, mixed-income community across St. Paul's into the St. Paul's Quadrant. But it doesn't plan anything. It doesn't say it has to be this or it has to be that. Those are going to be questions that will come back to you all, and you all will say yay or nay to.
All right, Mr. Riddick.
Yeah. Excuse me. Does this have anything to do with the Posey Lane project? There's a project that's already proposed for Posey Lane. Does this give them the ability to move forward without us, or do they need to come back with us?
No, they have. This will put in place a framework that can be used by that developer, but it all has to come back for a case-by-case specific review of what the proposal is. Got to go to the Planning Commission. Got to come to y'all. Every one of these will be a rezoning action.
Right. And so the land is owned by the city. Will we have to come to a price for selling the land to the individual developer?
Yes, you'll have to come to those terms
Right.
as you do
Right.
typically with any disposition.
Right. Okay.
So George, to be clear, we're just putting in place the intent for a mixed-use, mixed-income, high-density community, and setting some development standards, putting those in place as well for future development.
Yes, sir. And it's important to, at this time, it's limited to the area that is south of Brambleton, north of City Hall, east of St. Paul's, and west of Tidewater.
And last thing, George, I noticed in the documents, it speaks about Tidewater Garden School, either consolidated or redeveloped, also to improve Ruffina, but as well as to build a new Booker T, which I'm happy to see that. That's in this document as well. So is that your understanding as well?
And that was all in the transformation plan.
Yeah, so we used the transformation plan as the model for what needed to be allowed, but it's not set in stone that this is what has to happen. But these are
It's
things that are
It's a
optional.
guiding
can happen.
document. Yeah. The last thing, the structures such as our historical structures, First Baptist Church, Beach Street, St. John, I noticed that because potential development may impact those historical structures, that the National Registry of Historic Places would have to review any building close to those structures. Is that
Yes, sir. And it's actually our goal to work with them to make all of them become Norfolk Historic Landmarks as well. That's something we need to work on.
One more
Yes,
question.
sir, Mr. Riddick.
It's my understanding that Brenshaw is preparing to build on a site for this Posey Lane.
So they're preparing an application to go forward, but everything will come back to you all. But yeah, they're looking at conceivably putting in an application for a new pool of LIHTC funding called I think it's called the Innovation Pool, that would be early summer piece. That's right. So if you remember, we talked about posing with the piece that you're describing actually has the infrastructure in place, the road network and all that kind of thing. And what it does, what we're contemplating, Mr. Riddick, is just what you talked about, that senior housing, because we think there are seniors in St. Paul's that will stay in St. Paul's. We want to give them that first build opportunity.
Okay.
Right, and as you said, they're working on it, but before it goes forward, you'll have to approve it.
Okay, thank you.
And also, in 2018, we did update the plan. In 2018, we sent a transformation, city and housing authority updated our plan in 2018. So it's restating some of the things that we did in 2018.
It allows that plan to be implemented if that's what you choose to do going forward.
Clear. All right.
All right, Mr. Bull.
I move that members of the council assemble informally in closed meeting on February 26, 2019 at 5:34 p.m. in the 10th floor conference room of the City Hall building in the city of Norfolk for the purposes which are set out in clauses 3 and 29 of subsection A of section 2.2-3711 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as amended. Clause 3, discussion of the acquisition of real property off Military Highway and a property downtown. Clause 29, discussion of the award of contracts regarding Harbor's Edge and recycling. Mrs. Doyle?
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson?
Aye.
Mrs. McClellan?
Aye.
Mr. Riddick?
Aye.
Mr. Spiegel?
Aye.
Mr. Thomas?
Aye.
Mr. Alexander?
Aye.